All right. So
Number
another
five.
day, another day.
Number five.
Number five. Uh, I'm liking it though.
Yeah.
I'm having fun. I got a
That's
lot of
good.
feedback.
Oh yeah.
From from mutual students of ours.
Really?
Yeah.
Do they subscribe to your channel?
I think she did. Well, there's two actually, and one of them was like it was really, really, really good, and then somebody
Really?
else, yeah, they were really
Was
like.
it like did they post it on there or did they like
No, they just
email
knew.
you?
No, they just knew it was in the Google Hangouts. We were talking about it. Yeah, I'll
Okay.
tell you who it is later. Um,
Okay.
but and then obviously we had a coworker uh post something. Did you see that? Did you? No, you probably don't remember. Yeah, somebody
No.
somebody said they saw it the last weeks and it helped them a lot with like
The
being.
one where you talked about your dad?
Yeah, and then that was, I thought that was cool though.
That is cool.
I
That's
mean
very cool.
that this is evolving. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I
Well, I
like
mean,
it.
it doesn't really have to evolve, but I mean, I feel like
That's
it,
true.
it's a place where I get perspective.
A hundred
I get
percent.
to I get I get to think. I get to
Yeah.
I get to spend some energy uh getting to know and understand you, and I
Right.
think that that's I mean, I think that that builds relationship, and so I think that's worth it.
Appreciate
And
that.
if other people get something out of it too, that's amazing. If people watch it for 2 minutes and look at the timeline and be like, I can't watch this for another hour and 7 minutes,
I didn't
and
even
they
know we
don't
were
watch it, then
talking. I didn't even
I
realize we
know
were
it
talking
flies
that
by.
long,
It flies by.
dude.
I don't know,
Totally flies
but
by.
I'm glad. I'm glad that you're getting some positive feedback from it.
Well, I just, it's just so funny because like you're you were so well known in the school. Like you really have a really outstanding reputation, and by everybody, like I've never heard a negative thing about you ever. And and we talked a little bit last year. And I know, and I probably said this already, but it's just, I don't know. I'm just so excited that I'm getting to know you and that we're doing this. Like we're like
Yeah,
doing two things at the same time, two things that I kind of wanted to do.
yeah.
So it's just cool to me. And speaking of getting to know you,
Oh man, there we
this
go.
week, here we go. It's a good, I didn't even realize that was a setup, but here we go.
I had a week to think about it and didn't do anything.
Yeah, well, hey,
So
well,
it's
here's your time.
I know.
So now the prompt again. What what situation? And you said three last time, but I don't mean, if you have three, we
Yeah.
could talk about it. But we could just do one. But what situation has impacted you? You feel the most? What happened?
Um. So I'll tell you a little story.
That's good,
All
man.
right. So
I'm all yours.
um. So this goes back into childhood, and then, well, let me just tell you the story. So,
Okay.
so when I was a kid, this is probably I was probably like uh, probably third grade or so, second or third grade.
All right.
My mom, I remember her calling me over to a chair in the living room, and she told me to sit down. She was like, I have a question to ask you, and I want you to think about it because your answer could have some consequences. And I want to talk about it with you. And I was like,
Oh wow, jeez.
okay, yeah.
I'm
Well,
I'm
she sits
nervous.
me down. I know, right? It's not that bad. But she sits me down and she says, so next year, starting in third grade, um, I'm thinking about putting you in year-round school. And I was like, yeah, no, I don't I don't want to do year-round. I want a summer. I, I I want like Christmas break. I want spring break. I don't want to do year-round summer. And so she was like, okay, well, just here's what it is. You go to school for 6 weeks, you're off for 2 weeks. So on 6 weeks, off 2 weeks, you still get, like 6 or 7 weeks in the summer at the same time as everybody else, and you get 3 weeks at Christmas. So that's a little bit longer than other students. So uh, the district I was in was starting a pilot program for this year-round school, and that was kind of the division of it. It was going to be 6 weeks on, 2 weeks off, just kind of like throughout the year, pretty much.
Right.
And my question to her was, well, are my friends going to do it? And she said, I don't think so. And I was like, then no, I don't want to do that if my friends are not going to do it. And she said, okay. She signed me up for it
Oh.
and put me in it. And it was for 3 years. And I was really, really upset that she had given me the illusion of a choice, and then she did what she wanted. Right? It was
Wow.
more convenient for her because, or at least my perception was that it was more convenient because my dad traveled 3 to 5 days out of the week. So he was usually only around like Friday through Sunday.
Mhm.
Um, so he wasn't there a lot of my childhood. Um, and so my mother was, my brother was. I didn't have a great relationship with my brother. He's 10 years older than me.
Oh
Um,
wow.
so I just, I'm telling you that to illustrate kind of the significance of what I ended up doing. So we grew up in the country. Like, I raised animals. I raised pigs and steers and went to shows all over the state of Texas, and did
Oh
some in
wow.
Oklahoma too. And
So you're good at it.
at the height of it, there's like this point system
Yeah.
in Texas. I think they probably still do it.
I think they
Um,
do, yeah.
I was I think it was number 12 in the state. I was ranked number 12 in the state, and it had to do, like, you got points based on how many shows you went to, and like the like different sized livestock shows were, you got more, like for the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, right? If you went there and you got third place overall, that was more points than third place at Montgomery County Fair. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's like everything's weighted. Anyways,
Is this to get
did
your
pretty
blue
good with
jacket?
that. I couldn't do that until I was in FFA. Um,
Oh, so this wasn't FFA.
and no, this wasn't FFA, and you can't do FFA until you're in high school.
Oh, okay.
So this was 4-H is the
Wow.
program that starts uh, the nine is when you can start it. And so I did that, and my dad helped me keep like track of expenses and stuff like that. And he initially fronted the money, and to buy the first to buy my first pigs. And then you raise them for 9 months or a year, and then show them. And you know anyways, at the end of the year, I was able to sell them and then buy my next animals. And so eventually I started making money, right? I wasn't just breaking even, because some of those shows had cash prizes if they weren't terminal shows, meaning that's the end of the line for your animal. Like, no matter how you place, like, your animal's gonna be on someone's plate.
Right.
So I did that. I started when I was 9. I stayed in it through high school. I also
Wow.
did FFA in high school. When I was in high school, I was at uh, getting up at 4:30 in the morning and doing chores, feeding animals, bathing animals, and then I would leave for school. I'd leave for school at like 6, because I lived an hour away from high school. And if before I could drive and I caught the bus, it was like an hour and a half bus ride.
Oh.
Um, and so, like, I, by the time I was like a junior, I had about 15 or $20,000 in the bank of money that I had made from uh, raising animals and
Oh my
selling
God.
animals and stuff like that. No, it was
Holy
crazy.
cow.
Yeah.
No pun
And
intended.
no, for real.
Yeah, for
Um,
real. Yeah, for real. Wow.
and all this time, my dad was, you know, showing me like how to save money and like how to be frugal, and like, here, if you can't buy it for cash, you don't need it. And that was my dad's philosophy, and he made enough money that he could do that, like, with things like houses. But he was also one of those like really wealthy people that you like never knew, because you're always wearing sweatpants when I see you, and they have a hole in them that you've patched with duct tape,
Right.
but
Yeah.
like, my dad never bought a car or property or anything unless he had the cash. And so he was extremely successful in his business. um, and I can remember when I was a junior, I asked him where I could go to school, and he said, "Where can you get in?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know." And he was like, "Just start applying." So I did, and I got into every school that I applied to. I applied to about 10, um, between my junior and senior year, and I eventually brought up the money question. I said, you know, "How much are you gonna help me pay for school?" And he goes, "None of it." And I was like, "But I could, if I got into an Ivy League school, you could write a check for it." And he goes, "Yeah, I could, but I'm not going to do that because you wouldn't value it. So I've been teaching you how to save money this whole time, all these years, like almost 10 years. I've been helping you save money because I knew you were going to ask me that question, and I knew that I was going to tell you no. So that money that you've got in the bank, wherever you can go to college and use that to pay for it is where you can go. And I was upset by that. I wasn't used to hearing the word no.
That's, I don't know if that's, is
and
that ruthless? Is that smart? Is that, I mean, I don't even know.
at the time I felt it was ruthless, and now I feel like it's the greatest gift that he gave me.
Yeah.
Because I went to Texas Tech. I paid for school myself out of my pocket. I passed all of my classes. I got D's in a couple of them because they were math and science. But,
Sure.
um, but I graduated debt free. I didn't have any student loan debt when I graduated.
Wow.
I had my teaching certificate, and like that was a I mean, it was a big deal. Like I'm really thankful that he did that, because that changed it. Like, it wasn't a quick change. It's been a pretty slow change
Yeah.
in my mindset to go from being irritated by that to being deeply appreciative of it.
Sure.
Um, but the reason why I told you about what my mom did is that when I realized that I was going to be paying for college myself, I knew I needed to get as far away from my mom and still pay in-state tuition. And we lived kind of east of, um, we lived east of, slightly northeast of Houston. And so it was like almost a 9-hour drive to Lubbock. So I knew that my mom couldn't show up without calling first. And that was a big motivator for me. I mean, the only places I applied in Texas were Texas Tech, the University of North Texas, and Texas A&M Kingsville. Um, so I was already, and turns out from where we lived, Kingsville was about an hour to 2 hours closer than Tech. Um,
Hmm.
so that like I came from a small town. I came from like my one time skipping school with my friends to go to um, like this new Mexican food restaurant that had opened. It was a closed campus, but we skipped and we drove to um, drove to this restaurant, and the principal walks in and he looks at our
Whoa.
table. There's like four of us, and we're seniors, and we have um, there's 1,200 students in the school,
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah,
So like our class was like just less than 200, and so he knew everybody,
yeah.
and he said, "Y'all enjoying your lunch?" And we were like, uh, "No." And he was like, "Okay." And he goes, "Clarke, I'll be calling your mom when I get back." And I was like, "Okay." And he and his wife and my mom were in the same Bible study.
Oh.
And so by the time I got home that day,
Oh.
and it was bad.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
um, after we graduated college and we moved to Dallas because I married a girl from Garland,
Mm.
which means everything that you think it does. Um, she's she's a little spicy, a little salty, um,
No comment.
very pretty, and not afraid to fight. So,
But that
um,
sounds accurate. That's pretty much what I had in my head.
yeah, yeah. We moved back to Dallas, and then I had a buddy from high school who um, was dating a girl here, and he moved up here, and like we didn't have kids, they didn't have kids, they were still in school, and there was we hung out with him one night, and he he gave me, through my wife, he gave me like a really, really great compliment. He told my wife I'd like gone to go get something or gone to the bathroom or something like that, and he goes, "You know what, Rachel? It's really good to see Matt dress himself." And she was like, "Yeah, he does that." He was like, "No, no, you've met his mother, right?" And she was like, "Yes." He was like, "His mama dressed him funny. We never really knew who he was, right?" And he was using like clothes to like as the as just the idea that I'm like he realized that who I really was very different from how I had learned to present myself to people. And I
Wow.
thought that was really interesting. I mean, and that's I mean that was impactful because I I realized that I had lived all of my life in the shadow of my mom's expectations,
Mm.
and that was a she occasionally made it difficult, you
Yeah.
know, and um, I don't know if she watches these. I know she's on Facebook, but I mean, it's a lot of this is stuff that she and I have talked about since I've become grown.
Mm.
But that was a like and that's kind of like a track of an impact, from like why I wanted to move away, how I developed the means to be able to do that, and the impact that's had on me. You know, I um, those are things that, like, when I look back at it, have kind of set me up in a way to like decide how I want to parent. My dad offered me
Ooh, story.
yeah, I've got them. I've got a ton of stories about both of them. Um, my dad was one of those. He was very. Um, my dad was a very candid, very honest. Like, don't ask him if you don't want to hear what he's gonna say type people.
Right.
Because he's going to pull no punches, and he's going to give you the absolute truth as he understands it.
Right.
And you know, I and I can remember several conversations throughout my young and early and middle adulthood, where I'd tell my dad I was going to do something, and he'd say, "You don't have to do that." And the first one was college. I was like, "Dad, I'm gonna go to here's the colleges that I'm thinking about applying to." He was like, "You don't have to go to college." And I was like, "I know, but like that's what I want to do." And he was like, "Okay." And then
Was he
2 years
college
into
educated?
college, he was, yeah, he played football at the University of California, Berkeley. He
Whoa.
played at
Is that the Trojans?
Cal. No,
Okay.
no, it's like the Golden Bears, I think.
Okay, 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 okay.
Yeah,
That's still big time. Wow.
yeah. He played against Dick Butkus, the linebacker, the
Yeah.
famous linebacker for the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Played against him when he was in college. He had 2 full ride scholarships offered to him. One was Cal Berkeley, and the other one was Notre Dame. And that was one of his
Whoa.
biggest regrets, was that he didn't take the scholarship at Notre Dame. So anyway, I mean, I have a ton of stories about my dad, but
Right.
um, he, I told him I'd, started dating this girl at Tech, and then, after a few months, I told him I was going to marry her, and he was like, "You don't have to do that." I was like, "I know, but I want to."
That's a
And
total dad. That's a
yeah,
total dad thing.
he was like, "Okay, all right, it's your life, it's your funeral." Um, I was like, "Thanks,
Right.
I think." And then I told him, we were gonna do foster care, um, and he was like, "You know, you don't have to have kids, right?" I was like, "Yeah, what are you saying? You didn't want me?"
Right, like your
So, yeah,
existence questioned.
yeah. Both my parents say that the closest they ever came to divorce was when my mom found out she was pregnant with me. My my dad thought that my brother was it, like, because there's 10 years that separate me from my brother.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And I he was like that. Said I thought we were done. It turns out your mom had other plans. It was yeah, they they would he would occasionally bring that up when they were fighting. Um, not
Wow.
not maybe the healthiest, but um, a lot of it was just like very like tongue in cheek.
Yeah, yeah,
Very
yeah, yeah.
he was like one of those people that's like kind of like I see your button, so I'm gonna push it.
Yeah.
He was really good at identifying very quickly what made people tick. He was real good at that. He was very perceptive.
Mm.
And I think a lot of what, you know, I've I think that I kind of get that from him,
Oh,
a little bit, that
yeah.
his I was at the I was the subject of a lot of perception for him growing up, and so I feel like that like
Projection much?
really exactly. Yeah, yeah. So um but I think about, like, I mean, he he traveled for a living because he was a salesman. He had like this huge territory that he covered, and he would come through while we were in college. He would come through Lubbock. He had clients in West Texas, and so he'd stop by and he'd take me out to dinner and stuff like that. And I can remember one time he picked me up, or I was dropping him off or something. We were like stopped in a parking lot. And he said, you don't have to finish college. Said you could drop out right now and come to work for me, and I would start you at 60,000 a year right now, which is currently more than I make.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah, but he grossed and maybe even netted 6 figures a month,
Oh my gosh.
something like that. I mean, it's ridiculous
Yeah.
how much money he had, and like how, like, man, I was just like so frugal. I mean, he drove a beat up truck for like the longest time, and like he'd never. I mean, no, again, he wore sweatpants that he had a hole in the butt, and he'd fix them with duct tape on both sides, so it
Right,
wasn't
right,
sticky.
right.
He was a genius.
Oh, that's so funny.
But I mean, a lot of the things that I learned by observing him and watching him are things that I carry with me daily. He passed away in 2016. Passed away in February, so it's been about 4 years or so
Hmm.
since he passed away. But those are the things that like are always going to stay with me. Just
Oh,
like
shaped you.
his his advice. I mean, he was famous for saying, "Can I make a suggestion?" And whether you wanted it or not, he was going to tell you a better way to do it. But yeah, so that was, I guess that's a few things that kind of work together. Um, I'll I'll also tell you. Okay, so here's something that has impacted me as a teacher.
Okay.
So I I went to Tech for, I majored in English, I minored in education, and then near the end of my senior year, I took the certification test. I did student teaching. I did it all kind of the traditional route.
Okay.
So when I graduated, I had my teaching certificate,
How did
and
your
I
dad?
graduated.
How did your dad feel about you becoming a teacher? Just curious.
Well, you don't have to do that, you know.
Okay,
Like,
that's what I thought. I wasn't sure,
yeah,
but okay.
yeah. I mean, he appreciated that it had a steady income and that it had insurance,
The
and that
logistics,
I
right?
wasn't going to be paying like self-employment taxes, since those are exorbitant. But uh, I think he like came around to the idea when he realized that like I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
And the reason why I turned him down for working for him is like, man, would that type of money be wonderful? Absolutely. But I'm going to sacrifice my family on the altar of my job. That's what he did. There was nothing that I wanted that I couldn't have, right? Because he had the means, they had the means to provide it. And they had good boundaries. I mean, they told me no plenty of times.
sure.
But um, he he just didn't see like the appeal, right? Like he didn't, he wasn't. I mean, my mom was so gushy about it. I mean, she was the total opposite of him. She was like, "Oh my gosh, you're gonna change the world," you know. And I was like,
Yes.
yeah, okay. I've been a teenager, mom. Like, I don't really know. Yeah, and I was like, well, if that happens, great, but that's not why I'm doing it.
Sure.
But he eventually came around, and he loved to read. I mean, my love of reading came from him. I mean, would we would read, we would eat together, but all of us were reading a book. We read together at the dinner table in complete silence. Like for the longest time, like as a kid, I always thought my dad just read library books. I mean, that's like all I saw him do in his office was read.
Yeah.
And he'd bring, you know, 3, 4, 5 books home at a time, and he would be done with them in a week. I mean, just a voracious reader, just like
Mhm.
completely insatiable appetite for literature.
Mhm.
And he liked everything. I mean, I remember when uh, he discovered Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park way before the movies,
Mm.
but he I was really into dinosaurs, you know, and he was like, "Well, you might like this." You know, it had like a dinosaur skeleton on the front in black and
Mhm.
white,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and so I read it. I mean, I didn't understand like half the words in the book, but I mean, I think I was like 7, and I mean, there's some pretty adult parts in that book. Um, and he didn't think anything of it. He was like, "Here, read it," and I loved it. I mean, I thought it was great,
Yeah.
and so um, you know, just like little things like that. Like he was always, I don't know, I don't know whether he was meaning to do this or not, but it always felt like he was like sharpening my trajectory. You know, the like a lot of his decisions around like parenting, I feel like really pushed me toward a lot of my strengths. And you know, like I said, I don't know if he meant to do that, but that's kind of um, what I see now when I look back at that. But I was English major, graduated with a teaching certificate. We moved here. We moved back to Dallas. We lived in Farmers Branch for like 9 months, you know, in a like a we had a short lease in a really small house. Um, and then we moved here to Richardson. And then my wife's family is from Garland, and she's super close with her family. Um, and so we're, you know, right next door. Um, so one of the things that um, really shaped me as a teacher was like my first 3 weeks in the classroom, right? Like,
Mhm.
do you remember that feeling where you
Oh,
just like,
I
I
I
don't know what I'm doing?
I relive it
I just, yeah, like
constantly.
I need to, just like you've got this need to apologize to these kids because you're like, hey, I hate to put it to you like this, but you're collateral damage for me learning how to teach,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
it's what they're, I mean, you can't practice first.
No. It's funny. It's funny you say that because that's like my favorite tweet of yours. Like I will never forget that tweet. I will that like that's
Really?
oh yeah.
I've forgotten it. What?
I will
That same idea?
Oh yeah, no, I love it. No, I love because you're so right. You're so right. You just we're not. Anyways, yeah, we're kids are collateral damage when it comes to teaching, especially in the first what
Yeah,
3 years, maybe.
right. Yeah. So I got a job in Dallas.
Okay.
Said my first job teaching was in Dallas ISD, which if you're familiar with, like, we're not going to say any more
we're
than
we're
that.
not
But
we're not we're not we're
if
not we're not going to talk about
if
that.
if any of you fine audience members are familiar with Dallas ISD, you know the look that Juan and I just shared is it just reveals all of it.
All of it.
So my first job, I got it at a job fair, at a Dallas job fair in like mid July, like right before the school year was going to start. I had been doing construction with my father-in-law, um, and I went to this job fair. I only talked to a couple schools. It was pretty busy, but um, I hit it off with administrators from like only two schools. One was the alternative school, and the other
I'm not surprised by
was a
that.
huh. Is that
I'm
again?
not surprised by that at all.
Yeah, yeah. No. Um, and the other school is located in South Dallas, off of Malcolm X and Hatcher, right? Which is
I know where that is.
uh, yeah. So it is a very high poverty, high crime.
Yeah.
It's predominantly African American, and I knew that because when I sat down at the table to interview with the administrators, um, I remember when I was in high school playing basketball and making the playoffs, and we were gonna face, like, depending on if we won, like, the next 3 games and they did too, this was gonna be, the team that we faced, and they were consistently state champions. Phenomenal athletes, amazing coaches. Like, I had heard of this school before, and I was well aware that if I got hired there, I would be in the minority, right?
Uh-huh.
That by which I mean I'd be the only white guy in the zip code.
Uh-huh.
So, but I said yes, and I started, and it was wow. It was a culture shock, right? Like, it's one of those things you're like, you do something and you're like, yeah, I know what this is going to be like. Like, I think I know, like, how it's going to go, and then you do it and you're like, oh my god, this is not anything at all what I imagined. And
Yeah.
it was a really cool, for me, it was an incredible learning experience, right? Like, I always feel like I end every year like learning more than I teach the kids.
Oh, 100%.
Um,
You should.
but this was like, wow. I mean, the school that where I went to high school, there was some diversity. It was like 30 or 40% um, African American. It was like 15 to 20 Hispanic and Latino, and then the rest were white kids. I don't think we had a single Asian student, no Indian students. Like, it was pretty much black, white, and uh, Hispanic. And but it was a really small town, and it had train tracks, So
Yeah.
they were the two sides of the train tracks. I mean, it was, and I think I would guess it probably still is very much segregated. Um, and so, like, while I was on athletic teams with people who didn't look like me, there was a definite, like, dynamic of separation
Uh-huh.
that athletes occasionally crossed, but in student, like the general student population, we did not. Um, and so, I mean, I kind of grew up steeped in a lot of, like, very subconscious racism. Um, and so for me, it was a huge deal to take a job at an all black school. Because when I started there, it was probably 96 or 97% black, and the rest were, Hispanic, and Latino students. Um, by the time I was done there, 5 years, I was there 5 years.
Wow.
Um, the there had been a lot of shift happening in the neighborhood. There was some gentrification starting to happen in and around Fair Park, um, and so there were families that were kind of being forced out, and then uh, there was a lot more. There was a higher influx of um, the students of Hispanic and Latino backgrounds. So um, all the while, never saw a white student in those hallways. Um, but I was about 3 weeks in, and I was teaching on level junior English from the textbook because I didn't know what I was doing,
Sure.
and my and I wasn't getting a lot of help from the junior English teachers. Um, and then I was also teaching uh, on level sophomores, and then I had like one or two uh, pre AP classes. Um, so I had like three preps my first year, which one prep your first year is hard
Oh,
enough. I
3.
mean, I'm telling you, man. I mean, these kids, they survived in spite of me, and if they learned, it wasn't because of me. Um, but there was a I had I had a couple classes of students that were just like, I felt like they were out of control. I felt they were like very disrespectful um, to me. Like, I don't know, just like throwing stuff, and I mean, just like lots of immaturity. And I don't think that that has like a ton to do with like race
No.
as much as things like that. I think a lot of times have to do with how kids respond to stress, and and a lot of them were living in really stressful environments,
Yeah.
so many of them had very supportive parents that wanted wonderful things for them, and I could definitely see that. And I had kids that were so talented and just incredible, but I had like a handful of kids that were just absolute jerks, especially like the younger one, like my sophomores and freshmen. um, I had a there was one day, um, I saw this, like, we'd been in school for a few weeks. I think it was somewhere between, like, it was like the first 6 weeks, but it was like we'd been there at least 3-4 weeks. And this the one student um, had not shown up. Right, she had never seen her. Right, she was never there when I called the roll. The students knew her, or like they knew of her. They'd gone to school with her, or like whatever, and they were like, "Yeah, she's not here. She's not here."
Mhm.
Um, And so, and then one day she showed up, and let me tell you something. Her name was Lovely, and she was anything but. I was just very. I feel like when people name their children after like attributes
Mhm.
or like characteristics, I just think it goes so wrong. I just think it goes so wrong. I've only seen it go wrong, you
Right,
know?
right, right, right.
Like I've had students named Sunny, uh, I've had students named Precious,
That was
I've had students, Lovely. Um, and yeah, I mean, she was in my class for 15 minutes before she walked out. And she spent every single one of those 15 minutes pointing at my face, up in my face, cursing me out while the class is like dying. They're dying of laughter. I mean, it was so humiliating. And when I get humiliated, I get angry,
Mhm.
right? So
Sure.
like uh she left. Thankfully she left. Um but I still had like there's still like 20 minutes left in the day.
Oh my God.
And this was my last period of the day. So these kids they were gonna leave and go home, when this class was done. And I lost it. I lost it
Did
on
you?
them. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I lost it. I said terrible things. I
Yeah,
cursed at them.
yeah.
I mean, all the while they're like looking at me in this like kind of like I can't tell if they're like shocked or they're highly entertained, right? Which in my mind is like that's making me even more mad
More,
because
yeah.
like I'm doing this as a response to what you did, and now I feel like you're mocking me for it with your laughter and your giggles and your faces. And I don't remember everything I said, but I do remember a kid saying, "When the bell rings, can we leave?" And I remember saying, "I don't give a shit what you think is going to happen when that bell rings. You are not leaving this class. You're going to stay here. You're going to listen to me. You're going to respect me." It- I was flying off the handle. I had, I felt like I had lost all control because I had, and man, it was brutal. It was really bad. And then I got done and I just stared at them and they were quiet for 7 seconds and then they all burst into laughter. I mean, it was one of the greatest like senses of defeat that I've ever had. Ever, ever. And I fail all the time. It was one of the worst.
But you felt that
Um,
one.
oh my gosh, man, I was so mad. I mean, just like I'm this giant bearded white guy in a room of black children, and I'm yelling horrible things at them, and like none of it was racist. Like none of it. It was all just like that is so disrespectful. Like like I'm trying to take care of this situation. I've never seen this student, and y'all laughing and encouraging her to curse at me says so much about your character. And I'm like, I mean,
Wow.
it was a really, really tough, it's a really tough experience. And uh, I came back the next day. We were on block schedule, so I had a different class the next day. So that was good to get like a breather between um, seeing them again. And uh, I like played out all these scenarios in my mind of like how they're gonna respond and what they're gonna do when they come back and what I'm gonna do and all of that.
Mhm. Yeah.
And like they walked in, that next time I saw them, sat down, got their books, started on the warm up, and like I just apologized. And I was like, listen, I lost control the other day, and that was wrong. I'm the adult in the room. I should be able to maintain my composure even when things are getting to me, and I didn't do that. And I said some really awful things to you guys, and that's not the teacher that I want to be. I don't want to get a reputation as that teacher. I don't want to hurt you guys, and I'm genuinely sorry for how I treated y'all. And if you'll forgive me, I would like for us to start over. And they
Wow.
responded really well to that.
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
I think most of the people, like, I mean, teenagers are, I mean, they're like drug dogs. I mean, they can just smell fear, right? Like they, I
Oh
think
yeah.
that kids, I mean, they just know, like they know when someone's genuine, they know
Oh,
when someone's full of BS.
1000%.
Like I don't think that kids get credit enough for like,
Oh.
and uh, my I mean my
Say that last part again because you froze a little bit. Kids don't
well
get credit
I
for what?
well kids don't get I don't feel like adults give students credit or give children credit for being as perceptive as they are,
No.
right? Like I think a lot of times adults want to explain away the truth that kids share because it makes us uncomfortable, and we perceive the idea of being uncomfortable with losing control, and because losing control is uncomfortable, and so I think a lot of times we have that like subconscious association. And I feel like most people can handle anything if you're honest, and if you speak from a place of sincerity. And I knew I couldn't go back and undo what I had done. All I knew was that I have a whole year left with these kids, and I've got to make it manageable for me. And so I needed to think about what I did and how that might have looked and how it might have hurt, and apologize, and just like suck it up and find my humility bone, and 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 apologize to him and mean it. And that for me has changed. I mean, I don't even think. I mean, I don't share that story with kids, um, but when I think about it now, I think about all the kids that I've had since then who have benefited from who I've become as a result of that mistake.
Well, yeah. And I think I think what's interesting about that too is oh,
Apology,
oh you froze up.
or like, yeah, I like I feel like my Wi-Fi's in and out.
Okay.
So, you know, I just, I, I hate that I made that mistake, but I'm so glad that I learned from it,
That's the most, yeah.
because it's changed the dynamic for me. It's allowed me to be better about communicating more clearly with students, and like being able to be genuine and say, hey, I don't know, like I don't know that answer, or I don't, interpret this piece of literature the same way, and that's okay, because I, I, I think that giving ourselves and giving students grace is just giving them room in the garden to grow, like it helps them start to kind of map out the type of people that they want to be, and if we can give them one example of how that can look, it puts some degree of power and control back in their hands, because those are things that they'll get to choose for themselves,
Thanks.
right? Like we don't
That's,
always get to choose our circumstances. We don't sometimes really get to choose our mistakes. Sometimes those just happen. Sometimes we don't realize they're gonna happen when we make certain choices. But I think that if we can learn how to face those honestly, I think it builds a great foundation to be a person who continues to learn and doesn't take themselves too seriously.
yeah,
I think that's really necessary.
yeah. And but that's, I mean, you summed up what, I mean, you described it beautifully, and what I use is self-awareness. Because if you hadn't, think about what you were just saying, like it's kind of interesting how you empathize so much with your
Can you hear me?
kids. Yeah, I can hear you. It's
Okay.
so interesting how you empathize so much with your kids, but I mean, we could actually connect that back to that situation, your first story with your mom, because you know what it felt like to have your power taken away from you. You know what it felt like to for somebody to say, "Hey, it's going to be this one thing," and then completely change it. I mean, and then have no say, no power,
Yep.
no say, no nothing. I mean,
Yep.
that was the first, and it's so interesting that that was the first thing that you talked about. And we're now at, as we went through this journey in your life, we're at this point where you learned this super great lesson, but if you hadn't have had known what that felt like, if you hadn't have known what it felt like to be presented with something that you thought was a choice and then have it removed. And then what's interesting to me also is all that raising of animals, and the and the and the amount of time and effort and energy it took to like keep track of everything, and to empathize with hard work, and to empathize with, even your animals. I'm sure you loved your animals. I'm sure you cared about your animals. So here you are learning about your animals. You're selling them, you're slaughtering them, the ones that you don't want, the ones you want to keep. You're making all this money, but you're not spending it. Like, you're you had to develop a very, well, you didn't have to develop, but you, through this process, you developed a very unique way of looking at the world, where nothing was taken for granted, where you saw that there was someone in your life that really, in the snap of a finger, could do whatever he wanted with you and give you whatever he wanted to you, but he never did. And So you had to really struggle, and you really had to work for really everything that you have. But at the end of the day, you were given that gift of being sort of self-made in the sense, but you were never maybe possibly given the opportunity to express that until you were married, maybe one of those things. And so once you got married, once you were in your teaching position, then you kind of like fell into place. And then here you are, your first year, kind of being ready to like tackle this on, and then you just get slammed with reality. but that's everybody though, right? But that's everybody. But look at you being humble enough and being true to who you are, true to really who you are as a person, and coming back from that and saying, look, I wasn't who I am. That wasn't me.
Yeah.
And how great was that self-awareness for you to pull yourself and say, wow, that wasn't who I am. I know I'm a lot of things, but that's not who I am. And you were apologizing to the kids, but you probably taught them that lesson. I know impacted them for the rest of their lives. I know it, because when had they ever seen a male, when had they ever seen white male pull themselves together and say, hey, this, I did not, that was not right, you know. And we could look at socioeconomics all day long, right? But I'm pretty sure getting yelled at was normal for them. But the come around, the hey, that's not who I am, from this really, really physically present person, you, that I know. I mean, we can talk about collateral damage, but that right there, you taught them something really, really amazing. And especially when it comes to males, and I mean teenagers in general, right? They need to see that. They need to see someone that is so connected to themselves. And again, why I promote self-awareness, why I'm so focused on this, because exactly what you did is why you're such a good teacher, because you are totally plugged into who you are. You are you everywhere you go. There is not a place in your life where you don't try to be who you are. And when you're not who you are, you know it, and it bothers you. And that acceptance of yourself, man, kids need that. The world needs that. I need that. You know, I need that honesty and authenticity. Kids need that, because I mean, think about the struggle that kids go through. Kids go through, especially teenagers. What are they trying to figure out? Who am I, right? Who am I? I mean, like you went through that. Everybody goes. I mean, there's how many adults? How many adults are still struggling, paying thousands of dollars to therapists, and having all these kinds of like horrible whatever you might want to call them, because they don't know who they are, or they're not willing to accept themselves as they are, and so they do all these other things to deny themselves.
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic. And I love how you're right. Everything that happened to you made you who you are, but it's so interesting how everything also created this supreme empathetic capacity that you have, that you were willing to step into situations where you don't know how things are going to be resolved, like fostering. I mean, my ex-wife and I, we looked into fostering, and I'll tell you what, it's scary. It is a very scary prospect. So the fact that you and your wife were able to do that, and y'all have a lot of kids, right? I mean, y'all have quite a few. So to take that on, like your capacity to be empathetic, and then the practicality of your father is just kind of like, this is how you handle business, and this is what you like. like all of that is just so cool to have to know, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's so cool to how that all, you know, made Mr. Clarke. Like that's mad, you know, all these little pieces were definitely you. That's just so cool. Thank you for that. Really,
Absolutely.
that's so awesome, man. Honestly, that makes it makes me appreciate you more, because now I know where this is coming from, and to know that it was really coming from a place where you really had a lot of situations that, even though you knew they were not at the time, they didn't feel right to you, and they weren't really comfortable. Because of your journey, you've been able to like adapt and change and say, okay, now I know what this means, and now I know how this impacts me, and now I'm going to apply these lessons wherever I go. That's
Yep.
awesome, man.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
I appreciate you. Okay. So I've got to go.
Yes, you got to go.
But it's your turn to come up with the homework.
Okay. I
Right.
can't, yeah. Do I give it to you now, or
Sure.
like,
Yeah. Give our audience a cliffhanger.
all right. I want to know next week, and this isn't a money thing, but what profession or what would you want to do? Like, I mean, I know we want to teach. I mean, we want to teach. We're happy where we are.
Yep.
You know, we chose this. This is our path. But if we could do something else, or what's the next thing, or is there a passion that you wish you could just devote more time to? Is there something that you wish you could just kind of like, there's something that you really could, if you know, if there's like something that you could say, man, if I had a week, I could, and I just do this, you know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
if there was like a summer where I could just do this, like, is there something that you would like, oh, I would really love to just do, and then we'll talk about that.
Okay.
All right.
I've got a few.
Perfect. We'll
All
talk
right.
about that.
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right, man. Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank
You too.
you. We'll see you. Have a good week.
All right. You
Bye.
too.